Alfred the Great was originally the king of Wessex, and his descendants ruled England in the 10th century. Let's start when Æthelred was king. His first wife was Elgifu. They had several children. Here we list only the most important ones. After the death of his first wife, he married Emma of Normandy, a descendant of the famous Viking warrior Rollo. They had two sons, Edward and Alfred Ætheling. Æthelred had many conflicts with the Danes. He ordered the St. Bride's Day massacre of 1002, in which they even killed the sister of the Danish king. In 1013, Sweyn, the Danish king, successfully invaded England. This invasion was partly motivated by the St. Bride's Day massacre. He became the king of England, but he died only a couple of months later in the following year. After his death, his son Harald II succeeded him as king of Denmark, and his other son Knut was proclaimed king of England by the people of the Danelaw. The English nobility wanted Æthelred to be king again. They fought for the throne, and in the beginning Æthelred was quite successful and ruled England, but he died soon after in 1016. Since Æthel's son Ætheling had died a few years earlier, after Æthelred's death his son Edmund Ironside became king, but only for half a year. After his death, Knut truly became the king of England, and he ruled for a long time. To consolidate his power, Æthelred's son Edwig Ætheling was killed on Knut's orders. Edmund Ironside was already dead, but he had two very young children. Knut also wanted the infants to be murdered, but they were saved. They spent most of their lives in exile. Knut's first wife was Elgifu. They had two sons, Sweyn and Harald Harefoot. She was still alive, but Knut nevertheless married Emma, the widow of the previous king, in 1017. They had a son together named Harthacnut. Knut also made an alliance with English nobles, most importantly with Godwin of Wessex. Knut was not only the king in England. After the death of his brother, he became the king of Denmark. Later, he became the king of Norway as well. Knut died in 1035. So, who was the next king? He had three sons and two stepsons who were also the sons of the previous king. In Denmark, Knut was succeeded by Harthacnut, but he had to fight against Magnus the Good. Harthacnut also claimed the English throne, but he couldn't travel to England. Sweyn was king of Norway. He had no intention of going to England, and after his deposition he joined Harthacnut and died soon after in 1035. Edward and Alfred Ætheling were in Normandy. In 1036, Alfred Ætheling landed on the coast of Sussex and tried to restore House of Wessex. Earl Godwin betrayed him and had him killed. After that, Emma also had to flee. Harold Harefoot was the only son who was in England, so he was able to rule the country. Perhaps in Harthacnut's name, or maybe they were co-rulers. In the meantime, Harthacnut made peace with Magnus. Magnus took control of Norway, while Harthacnut ruled Denmark. They also agreed that if either died without an heir, his kingdom would go to the other. This will be important later. After Harald Harefoot's death in 1040, Harthacnut returned to England with his mother. They were not happy that Godwin betrayed Alfred Ætheling, so Godwin was put on trial, but received no real punishment. And just a year later, he was back in power. Harthacnut invited his half-brother Edward back, and he may also have recognized him as his heir. Harthacnut died after 2 years in 1042 without any children. After his death, Edward and Magnus both claimed the throne, but Magnus was not able to raise an army and attack England. He focused on Denmark and died a couple of years later. Edward was able to rule the country for a very long time. In 1045 he married Godwin's daughter Edith, but they had no children. The power of Godwin's son also rose at this time. By 1050, the relationship between Edward and Godwin had become very bad. Godwin had to go into exile. According to some sources, in 1051 the childless Edward chose William of Normandy, a relative of Emma, to be his successor. By the way, in 1052 Godwin returned for exile with armed forces, and their friendship was restored. He died the next year. If we still remember Edward the Exile, he returned to England in 1057, but died shortly after in the same year. He brought with him his family, including his son Edgar the Ætheling. Although the king favored Tortig originally, in 1065, after the Northumbrian revolt, he had to flee, and Harold Godwinson became the most powerful ally. Edward died in 1066 without any children. William claimed the throne because Edward made him to be his successor, allegedly. He was in Normandy. The Norwegian king Harald Hardrada also claimed the throne because of the deal between Magnus and Harthacnut. Tostig Godwinson supported Hardrada. So, two foreign powers are claiming the throne. The only Anglo-Saxon who could defend the country is Harold Godwinson. Even though he has no royal blood, he is only the brother-in-law of the late king, the Witan elected him as a king. In September 1066, Hardrada attacked the country. At the Battle of Stamford Bridge, Harold won, Tostig and Hardrada died. A month later, William attacked England, and at the Battle of Hastings, Harold was defeated. He died along with his brothers Geert and Leofwine. After the battle, the Witans still wanted an Anglo-Saxon king and elected Edgar Ætheling. This claim was disputed. As the Normans closed in on London, he bent the knee, and William the Conqueror became the king. Surprisingly, Edgar Ætheling was not killed. William the Conqueror's victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066 marked the beginning of the Norman rule in England, drastically transforming the country's political and social landscape.